Hey guys, That One English Teacher here, and we are back with another one. We are going to be looking at The Eve of St. Agnes by John Keats. This is part of the Romanticism period, and again, this is going with the English 3 Honors Summer Reading Assignments. We're going to be looking at this text through the lens of metacognition, and if you are familiar with this word, you're probably familiar with the real easy to remember definition that is just thinking about what you're thinking about. But we're going to go a little deeper into that today, talk about exactly what that means, how you can utilize these skills, and how you can apply them to your summer reading and also to the school year, because it's really helpful when you are able to think about what you're thinking about. Alright guys, so before we get into the text, I want to chat with you a little bit about expectations and strategies that we're going to be using that tie to metacognitive thinking. Metacognitive thinking has a series of pieces to it. So one would be goal setting. You would want to be monitoring your goals as you're reading, identifying what you know, identifying what you do not know, and adapting as necessary. So if there are things that are not going well in your processing, or if it seems as though your outcome is not going to be your desire because you're monitoring that, you would adapt and make changes as necessary so that you could write your path. Ways that you can do these different things are self-questioning. So as you're going through a text or as you're going through a process, asking yourself questions about, are we on the right track? Do you understand what's happening? Can you summarize this? Etc. I will model some of these as we go. Annotations or drawings in your text, and I always annotate, and I always encourage my students to annotate. It really is helpful, even if it doesn't feel like it is at the time. I know a lot of students struggle with annotations, thinking that it's just a waste of time or it's a waste of energy, but you'll find, especially in college, that if you can write down what you're thinking about as you're processing the text, when you come back to that text, you don't have to do as much rereading. You can read a lot of your own notes and say, oh yeah, I remember what I was thinking, I remember how I looked this up, etc. You're also going to want to think about maybe doing some concept mapping if you have a series of texts that are all part of the same theme, or if they're all part of the same time period. You can start tying together some of the characteristics of that time period via a concept map. So it's one of the other ideas. You could also do checklists. You could also do reciprocal teaching, which is where you would try to teach this to someone else, like how I am creating a video trying to teach other people how to do this. Part of metacognitive thinking is understanding that there are different types of knowledge. You can have declarative knowledge, and that's when you are just presenting a statement, like for a trivia, I understand this. Like, the capital of South Carolina is meh. And so that's how declarative knowledge works, and that's kind of a surface level knowledge, because sometimes with declarative knowledge, you might learn a lot of information for a unit, and then after the test, forget all of that knowledge. It's not something that you have kept with you. Procedural knowledge is when you're able to complete some sort of process or task. So if I were to say, what do you have to do to get your driver's license? And you explain to me all the steps to get there, that's procedural knowledge. You understand the procedure to accomplish that goal. And all of those little bits of declarative information, like stuff you've tied in. Oh, I need a permit. Like, oh, I need to go to the DMV. Like, what's the DMV? Oh, I need to take the driver's test. What does that entail? Oh, I gotta do all these things. That's procedural. So all of that has declarative knowledge in it. And then the third one and the final one, and the one that teachers try to get students to the most often, is, had to check my notes, conditional knowledge. So the idea with conditional knowledge is that you've taken everything that you have learned and now you can apply it to a new situation. And that is when you actually own whatever the knowledge is. So you might say, okay, I know how to get a driver's license, and I'm going to apply that knowledge to, maybe I want to get a fishing license or a hunting license. It's not going to be as much the same, but I know the process of getting a license, and I can apply that somewhere else. Maybe you want a motorcycles license when you get older. Maybe you want to drive 18-wheelers, and so you're going to have to get a license for that. You understand a process, and you can apply that knowledge to things that are similar but different in your future. So that's the point and purpose of metacognitive thinking, is that you are able to realize what you're learning, help yourself learn through it, especially if you're in a situation like over the summer when you don't have a set teacher or a set tutor. Being able to control your thinking and understanding all of that is really helpful. Now, I do have a little bit of a warning. With metacognitive thinking, I'm going to try to do my best with this video to not have too many edits, because the point of it is that you have to think about what you're thinking about, and sometimes that includes messing up. That includes downtime, because you really do need to think and process. So I'll try to cut out just silence, but I do want to illustrate in this video that teachers, like everybody, needs time to think about what they're thinking about, and that's why we encourage you guys not to multitask while you're trying to think about something intensely. So my focus is going to be all on this text. I hope your focus is too. Now let's get started. Okay, so you can see my text is clear. We are going to get started and we're going to work on this together. I am gonna have to hold my phone because I do not have a way of setting it up. So you might see a little bit of movement. I apologize for that in advance. I'm going to show you my key. We're going to go ahead and just keep the same colors and what they mean as we did for our first text for that consistency, and I encourage you to do the same thing. So I'm getting my purple pen for my first read through. And just like last time, we are going to start with the title. So I'm going to circle the word Eve. So part of metacognitive thinking is identifying what you know and identifying what you do not know. So as of this word, I know that this could mean Eve, as in the day before something, like Christmas Eve, or it could be an allusion to Adam and Eve. So I'm not quite sure yet what the author meant. So this might be a word that I want to define or look into. And then Saint Agnes. So what I do know is that a saint is connected to the church. They're often in charge of protecting certain people, or they have certain responsibilities, and people will pray to saints, or they will wear likenesses of saints on necklaces, things like that. But I personally am not familiar with who Agnes is. So this might require some research to figure out who she is and what this means. So if this is like the day before an event, then I need to know more information. This is a lot of information that I need to know. So as of right now, I know that I need to look into this title. All right, I was not comfortable continuing on with our reading until I was clear on the title, because I feel like understanding the title really helps you understand the text. So in this context, Eve does mean the day or evening before an event, and I looked into Saint Agnes. So Saint Agnes is actually the patron saint of virgins. And there was a day for her celebration. So there was a feast of Saint Agnes, and the night before that, there was a tradition for young girls to perform a series of rites or rituals so they could try to figure out who their husband would be. So there might be times when you're looking at a text, particularly an older text, where there might be celebrations or there might be allusions to things that we're not familiar with in our modern day age, or maybe your culture doesn't have the same kind of saints or the same kind of practices, whatever the case may be. So now I feel like, now that we understand more about what is to come in this poem, we're a little bit better prepared, and understanding the title has allowed us to do that. So now that I've done that, I want to set some goals for my reading. I'm going to add to our key metacognitive. I'm just going to leave it as that. So any kind of metacognitive skill or idea or what have you is going to be in orange. So we're going to start with goal setting. Alright, so for my goals, I want to understand what I am reading on a base level. I want to annotate each page, and then I want to further analyze for deeper meanings, and that can be things like allusions, looking for symbols, etc. Okay? So this is another metacognitive process, is setting a goal for your reading and making sure you understand your assignment. St. Agnes Eve, ah, the bitter chill it was, the owl for all his feathers was a cold, the hare limped trembling through the frozen grass, and the silent was the flock in woolly field. Alright, so the flock in woolly fold, is referring to sheep, most likely. I am going to note all of the different types of animals being referenced. Maybe that will be important later. Who knows? Numb were the breadsman's fingers while he told his rosary, and while his frosted breath, like pious incense from a censer old, seemed taking flight for heaven without a death, past the sweet virgin's picture while his prayer he saith. Alright, so now we have identified a character of note, and then we're just seeing like he, so this is all about him. The sweet virgin is likely referring to the Virgin Mary, and this is also like patron saint of virgins, so maybe that's important that that was presented in the first stanza of the poem. Pious incense from a censer old. I'm pretty certain that this is something that incense would be held in, but I'm going to make a little note to define that when I reach a stopping point. Okay? So this is me working my way through the first stanza. I know that it's cold. I know that there are animals that are hiding this fella who is a breadman, which I assume that means he works with bread, maybe? Like a baker? If not, we'll look that up. I'll put a question mark so I'll know to look that up as well. So this is what I'm going to do as we continue on. And I'll let you know if I come across anything, just so this video doesn't become like 40 minutes long, okay? All right, continuing to read through, annotating as I go. Did notice that it was not breadman, it was beadman. I looked that up. It's someone who prays for someone else, usually a benefactor. So we're starting off with an older character, reading through, discovering that there are a series of character changes. There are a series of setting changes. The language with cold and death is often used. We're seeing a lot of things that have to do with dreams, and then the idea of coming back to what's actually happening in real time. So I'm noticing things, I'm making my various annotations on the side. I'll be going back through with my blue pen, so anything that I'm unsure of that can be issued with a question, and anything that I want to have more attention paid to, I'm making a little mark so that way I can go back and do some research as well. Okay, so I'm on my second read through, and I've paused as I've gone just to kind of address some things. This poem starts with the beadsman, and as we are reading through, there's a character change where we meet a new character, a lady named Madeline. She is at a event for the St. Agnes festival, and so she's actually really focused on wanting to participate in the St. Agnes ritual of figuring out who her future husband would be. We have another change in setting, another change in character. We have Prothero, who is assumedly her lover, or someone that she is in love with at least, and they're not allowed to be together. They've been separated because their families don't get along, so we're seeing a lot of parallels to Romeo and Juliet. I've got the balcony scene when he crashes the party, and he actually has to rely on an old woman, very similar to the nurse in Romeo and Juliet, Angela, to assist him in trying to get in touch with Madeline and be able to see her. He wants to just see her and not interact with her. He finds out that she's intending to do the St. Agnes rite, and so then his plan changes. He wants to interact with her, and so Angela agrees to help him, etc., etc. There are these warnings. There's this idea about fairies and witches and otherworldly magical things. We have a lot of foreshadowing. And then you can see I've kind of stopped with making as many annotations because I'm trying to understand with the length of this poem, making sure I'm keeping up with everything that's going on. So a lot of this was done in my head. So that's part of the metacognitive thing, is that when you have your thinking going on for a video, I have to verbalize my thinking aloud for you. And so that's why I'm letting you know that you're seeing fewer marks here. I am not finished with going through the text, so there would be more that were added. But just in terms of summary, he hides in her room, Prothero does. Madeline makes a plan to go to bed. He awakens her, and so it's like her ritual kind of worked. She really did summon him. He really was there. He wanted to see her anyway. So that kind of all came together and made sense. And then the two of them run away together, but we don't really know what happens. So they go into the storm, and then everybody else is having these nightmares, and then we see that Angela and the beadsman have both died. So the youth go off into the storm. The older characters that we were introduced to both died, and then there are these ideas of like these nightmares of witches and demons and coffin worms. So this, again, the presence of death and these otherworldly magical creatures. So it's kind of leaves you with an odd tone, where this could have very easily been a romantic love story. You're kind of left as the reader wondering, did they make it? And that's part of my thought processing. So I'm just sharing with you my thought processing. Before we move on to our summer reading assignment where we actually write everything out, today I'll be doing the chapter summary and personal reflection. I want to think about the metacognitive process of dealing with ambiguity, or when things are ambiguous. And that's when sometimes a question is asked regarding a piece of literature or a topic or what have you, and there's no set defined answer. It's open for interpretation, and those are opportunities where you could have debates in class, or you could have an argumentative analysis, and you could present your thoughts with evidence from the text to back up what you think, and therefore be correct. Because as long as you can back up your answer in English class, you're correct to some degree. So in reading the Eve of St. Agnes, if you've got your text in front of you, there's this ongoing question about reality and fantasy, all these tying ins of these magical creatures that exist in fantasy or exist in fiction, but then they have these stark contrasting scenes where the setting is described in detail, the storm is described in detail, how the characters are feeling is described in detail. So there's a stark reality with great imagery and great description, and then there's all of these references throughout the text of magical creatures or fantasy or dreams. And so that, to me, it kind of offers you the opportunity to say, like, how much of this is actually happening and how much of this might be happening in the minds of the lovers. And especially with the jumping of time, like, you'll notice that it starts off in what we would consider present tense, because it's the evening before the St. Agnes Eve, and there's this party going on, and that's all happening in real time. But at the very last stanza, it says, "And they are gone, aye, ages long ago." And so then you kind of get the idea that you've been listening to some old wise person telling you a story, even though it was presented to us as though this was happening in real time, which I thought was really interesting, and it kind of tied me back to those Once Upon a Time stories, where, like, the story is presented in real time, and then you realize it isn't. But one of the questions that you could ask that doesn't have a set or defined answer is, do the lovers make it? Like, they go out into a storm, so they're able to escape all of these dangers and all of these various obstacles, and they go out into the storm. So do they make it? Do you think that they have actually succeeded? Are they going to be able to get to the home across the moors that Porphyro has established for Madeline? Because they are gone can mean, like, they have physically left and gone somewhere else, or it can mean that their spirits have left this realm and they are no longer amongst the living. And I think that you could find evidence for either, because there's foreshadowing throughout this entire text, and there's a lot of focus on cold and death and statues and ashes. And so death is in here, but because it's a romantic poem, I think that the idea is that they did get away, and that they really were in love. So saying that, like the line in stanza 38, "I will not rob thy nest, saving for thy sweet self," is the idea that Porphyro's not there to steal her away. He's not going to take anything from the nest except her if she wants to come. So I felt like that made him look like a really good person. He says that he is no rude infidel in that same stanza. In earlier stanzas, he has to convince Angela that he's not going to hurt Madeline before she's able to assist him, because she doesn't want any bad to come to Madeline. Very similarly with the nurse in Romeo and Juliet, who she actively works to protect Juliet. And then they're gone long ago, and then the last bit of the poem, like we were talking about, is very kind of negative. And it's that the Baron, who we assume is Madeline's father, the one who owns the castle and has all of these guests, the warrior guests have all these nightmares, and then Angela and the Beesman pass away, all in one stanza. And so what that could mean is that their way of life died and wasted away to nothing, and that whole dream of having a castle and these parties is not what the young lovers wanted. So very similarly, like with Romeo and Juliet, I really feel like this text would pair very well with the play, and I might use that in future years. But they had a very different idea of what they wanted their reality to be. So was their reality real, or was their reality just their own fantasy? And could it be that them dying was their way of achieving the house across the moors, the way Romeo and Juliet both died so that they could be together forever when the family would not allow them to? Because then after they died, the feud ended and they built statues. And in this one, the two young lovers get away, like they're gone, and then everything else kind of has, like, its nightmares, and dreamt of many a woe, with shade in form of witch and demon and large coffin worm. And then the Beesman has died and Angela has gone. But oh, here's another thought. Angela might have only been alive to assist them in their escape. And if the beadsman was praying for his benefactor, how are we to say that Porphyro couldn't have been the benefactor? And after those prayers were done and the couple gets away, these two older generations are no longer useful. They're no longer needed. And so they pass away so that the earth can then be inherited to the younger generation, who have a very different view of how life should be, where they focused on love and somewhat religion and fantasy and magic and charm to achieve their ends, whereas the Baron and his guests are like hot-tempered and focused on warrior, like they're focused on war. They have their spears. So it could mean that this reality of being in the castle is a lot like being in a prison, and the youth were able to escape because they deserved, a better life, or they fought for, or they needed to inherit the world so that they could make it a better place. Like, all of this that I'm doing right now, I'm literally thinking about it off the cuff. This isn't scripted. I do have my notes in front of me, like I've been showing you guys throughout, but metacognitive thinking is really just kind of creating a dialogue with yourself about, I wonder about this, and that connects me to this, and I wonder if this, and maybe the author pulled inspiration from this other author, and you could be correct. And sometimes you might be wrong. Sometimes you might get off on a tangent and you might start thinking like, oh, I think that Porphyro is actually, he's actually a witch or a demon, and he is the bad guy, and he's coming in and he's, kind of cursed this castle and all of its inhabitants because he's stolen away the precious princess. And so, like how like in fantasy stories, if the princess is taken away, then there's a like pallor that goes over the kingdom, and then a great white knight has to go and rescue her. Or Porphyro could be the White Knight in this tale, where she's being kept against her will, not able to make the decisions that she wants to make because she has a very involved family that have a very set way of seeing things. So this is just, again, processing and thinking. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit, get our nifty-difty summer reading journal out. And so today I'm going to be doing the chapter summary, but again, we have a poem, so I'm going to be doing stanzas 1 through 4, so that's lines 1 through 36, and then I'm going to do my summary in green, and I'll do my personal response in purple, so that way I only have to have 2 columns. You could do this with 3 columns. If you type this, you could make them all the same size, however you want to do it, but I'm going to get started working us through the summary. So as you're looking at stanzas 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I just broke them up that way because stanzas 1 through 4 are all talking about the beadsman, and then you have a character jump. And so that's, if I were going to do this, I would maybe break up the chapters based on the different characters, or who knows, like you could do it by threes, whatever system you establish. It's really difficult to break up a poem into chapters without any kind of set designated requirement. So I'm just doing this for the ease of explaining, because at least I'll have one character that I follow through the entirety, and it's also the entirety of the introduction of the poem. So before I start writing, there are things that I know I'm going to need to cover, and so this is me making my plan, my goal for my summary. I know I need to deal with the time of the year. So the Eve of St. Agnes, I looked up from an outside source that told me it was the 20th of January. It's cold. All the animals and creatures are freezing. The first character introduced is a beadsman, and I'll explain, what that is in my summary. And then I know that this person is cold, and he's old, and he's poor. And so I know this because he isn't wearing shoes, he's barefoot, he is meager and wan. I know that he's cold because his fingers were numb, his breath comes out of him, he has frosted breath, and he is praying in a quiet, empty chapel in the middle of winter, because that's his job. He's being paid to do that. So those are all things that I'm going to want to do that kind of introduce the setting, the time, the character that we're focusing on, and what I know about the character in terms of his socioeconomic status. So we're going to do that first. For the sake of the video, I'm writing directly into my notebook with a pen. Even though my pen can be erased, if you're writing in pen, just keep in mind that it's always beneficial to do some sort of draft writing before you do a final. As you're writing, you might discover that you may have spelled something wrong, or you might have presented information in a way that didn't make as much sense, or your writing was not as clear as you wanted it to be. So if you're typing, that does allow for a lot more opportunities for editing. But if you are writing in your notebook, just know that there might be times when you will need to scribble out or have some whiteout present, or start with a pencil, or maybe do a rough draft on a separate sheet of paper. Whatever works for you, just know that part of metacognitive processing is doing multiple drafts, because you want to improve each time. And as you're thinking about what you're writing, the more time you spend on what you're working on, the more you can perfect it. Okay, so now I'm switching to my personal reaction to the summary. Since you've already read the text, I'm not going to read through the summary, and we've kind of talked about it throughout this video, and this video is getting exceptionally long. So I'm just going to work with you through my personal reaction. Remember, you want to have complete sentences and complete paragraphs for each thing that you do, so at least one paragraph for your summary and at least one paragraph for your personal response. So with personal response, you have the benefit of being able to say I think or in my opinion, and by prefacing your opinion, you know, anything that you might say that might be incorrect doesn't necessarily matter, so long as you can say I got this idea from X point in the text. So I would say something to the effect of, it's really interesting that the text begins this way because we focus on a character who takes up 4 stanzas and then is not heard from again until the very last line of the poem. We spend a lot of time focusing on how cold the winter is and how silent the empty chapel is where the beadsman is praying, which contrasts starkly when he travels northward past the baron's castle, where he hears music and party preparations and the idea of this excess. So we're immediately seeing contrast. We're immediately setting up expectations of what we're going to see in the rest of the poem. So we have all of the cold, we have this idea of age, and then we have the idea of excess. And so thinking about which life is better, which way of going through life is most enjoyable, which is a prison. So thinking about, if you can consider the castle to be like a prison, there's those who would say that poverty is also a prison, because one can be trapped in the sense of being poor because it is difficult to move between social classes. So these are all things that I would want to introduce in my personal reaction. And then I can also say I really enjoyed the imagery, the use of adjectives, and all of the different ways that things are described. It helps me to paint a picture in my mind. I can talk about how I was concerned for the beadsman because I know that he is freezing and he's also barefoot. His fingers are numb, so it is likely that he will not live long considering his way of life. So these are all ways that I can go into my personal reaction from the summary itself. Okay, and here is my entry for my chapter summary. So I have my summary in green and my personal reaction in purple. Alright guys, and that wraps up The Eve of St. Agnes by John Keats, analyzed through the lens of metacognition. I hope this video was helpful to you in thinking about what you're thinking about. I know that it's a lot longer than the others. It's because there were pauses and there were errors in the video that were intentionally not edited out or reshot, just to illustrate how even a teacher can make a mistake and then process through it, improve. And I was trying to show you guys, either through text or through me vocalizing my thought processing to you, to show you how I went through my metacognitive process. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave those in the comment section below. Any suggestions that you have for future videos, I am more than willing to entertain. And join me for my next video, where we will be continuing our process with the Romanticism, and we're going to be looking at some essays. I'm not going to be doing those annotations on camera just because those essays are a lot longer, but we're going to be talking about them in my next few videos, okay? So thank you guys so much for showing up, and I'll see you on the next one.